Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Lewis, thanks for joining on the show.
Thanks so much, Dan, for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So it sounds like the topic for today, in addition to your journey, is going to be this kind of changing media landscape and attribution and all these things that are this constant effort to stay ahead of, right? And what I like about this topic is that it's sort of a way to deal with like larger issues related to the ways we fool ourselves, into thinking that something's working when it's not, or vice versa. And it's just playing out on a much grander, like lucrative scale across ginormous companies and agencies and all that sort of thing. So before we get into that, to back up a little bit, I'd love to just learn about your background and kind of where you're coming from with this and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in digital media and ad tech for just north of 23 years, which either makes me a survivor or a veteran or a fool. I'm not exactly sure which, but I've had a really good time helping to build this industry, and spent the majority of my early career on the sell side. So helping publishers make money from advertising. And our industry has done such a good job of needlessly overcomplicating things, and that's resulted in problems persisting that have been problems since the beginning of programmatic and even since the beginning of digital media buying. Things like measurement, right? So understanding which of your advertising worked and where and why and how, so that you can act on it, right? A long time ago, there was a guy named Mr. Wanamaker who said famously, some of my advertising works, I just don't know which half of it is. And it's kind of crazy that here we are in 2022 with all our great technology, and we're still not really able to answer that question in many cases. So I figured, I took the industry as far as I could from the sell side to really bring it forward beyond that. I needed to be on the demand side because that's where the dollars are. And advertisers insisting that things be done correctly is really the only way that you're going to make that happen. And so I found this company called Martin, to where I work. They do lots of interesting things around helping marketers understand with a great deal of precision and accountability what's working and where is it working and why is it working? How can I do more of what's working and less of what isn't?
Yeah, that's great. And to kind of go to that point where you switch to the DSP side, can you talk a little bit about that? Like what changed from when you maybe began your career to when you decided you were done with the sales side?
Biggest thing that changes on the demand side is that people take your phone calls. It is easy to be blown away how now that you are on the side of the budget, you're going to get the phone answered on the first ring. And that's good. You want an industry where there's three cornerstones: advertisers, publishers, and consumers. And I'm sure we'll talk in a moment about the changes around third-party cookies, Apple and Google's cross-app targeting. It creates a world in which consumers finally are going to have real control over how their data is used and where. And if they don't consent to it being used, then, the provider can't. And so that actually has a lot to do with measurement and attribution, right? It's not uncommon for marketers and even publishers to ask, absent the third-party cookie, absent cross-app tracking, how do we measure? How do we handle attribution? And the good news is it gets better, right? These changes are a good thing for several reasons. First, it's the right thing to do for consumers. We're all consumers at the end of the day. Our families are all consumers. Second, it brings a lot more accuracy and precision to attribution and to targeting. The scale of those users that are targetable using data gets smaller, which means CPMs are probably going to increase, but accuracy becomes far greater. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. There's a lot to kind of dig into there. And I'm, pretty much a neophyte when it comes to media. We've done a lot of internal stuff on a very small scale in the B2B space, which is different. But I guess one thing that kind of comes to mind is that the role of media agencies is changing. It seems like the algorithms are taking a lot more control and maybe like cutting away at the usefulness of what a media agency does, which is something that I think a lot of people listening might be worried about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and kind of two questions. The first is, how can a media agency be useful now, in this present moment? And how do you think a media agency, if we even call it that, will be useful in 10 years, if you had to guess?
Yeah, it's such a great question. The algorithms are not taking over. It would be lunacy for marketers to allow the algorithm to take over completely and kind of extricate themselves from any media decision-making process. And of course, that's what media buyers do and media agencies do really well. I think the role that they need to play, continue to play, is that of a trusted counselor. So again, going back to how the industry is, wildly overcomplicated, like this stuff is hard. And if you are a chain of, vacuum cleaner companies and you've got franchisees all over the country and they know there should be doing something to drive people into the store online, but they don't know what or how or where, they basically got two choices. They could send their web person to media school and then hire a team around them, or they could work with a media agency who has the tools at their disposal to allow that marketer to punch above their own weight and get access to many of the same tools that they have access, that their larger competitors have access to. So what's their role today? To bring the right tools to the client and to provide trusted counsel around, what do I do with my big, small, or medium advertising budget? Where the media agency is going to be 10 years from now? Back when all of this started, so like 2009, 2010, at the dawn of programmatic, I was taken on a tour through an agency by a very senior person there. And he kind of points to a room full of people and he's like, see how they all have Excel up on their screens? They're all going to be out of jobs within the next couple of years. And no, like that did not happen. It cannot happen, right? The idea of disintermediating the media agency has been attractive to some in the space, but it never works. And it never works for a bunch of reasons, including media agencies are specialists. People that own vacuum cleaner franchises are not specialists. People that own, shampoo companies to a large extent are not specialists, right? So you've got to have this knowledgeable third party there who's able to do full funnel marketing, top to bottom, and that, to toot our horn just for half a second, has a technology partner that enables them to give their clients something just a bit better.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it kind of makes sense if you compare it to like Wall Street or anywhere else where there's quantitative, programs you can use to trade stocks, but hedge funds haven't gone anywhere. So there is something to that. I think that there's a lot of eagerness to say, so the XYZ will be dead in a few years. And it's always true to some marginal extent, but there's always, humans that have to be involved when there are big budgets, to go along with these things. So that all makes sense. And to allow you to toot your own horn, I mean, our company's called Sales Schema. You can sell here. It's fine. Like what are those things that can, to break it down? Like if you are a P&G and you're hiring a McCann, like what are you getting access to that a small agency or small company is not getting access to?
Chiefly, the big agencies are able to provide access to an army of data scientists who, to your point a moment ago about the algorithms taking over, the algorithms are not taking over, but they are an extremely important tool, gaining in importance as we look to not artificially have a computer brain decide where our marketing goes, but to use machine learning to augment the knowledge that we have as professionals and media buyers. So maybe a half step back is worth it. My company is called Martin. We're a demand side platform, a DSP. Really simply stated, a DSP connects buyers of advertising with sellers of advertising space. And there's a whole lot of necessary and unnecessary complication to that, but there's really three items in the media buying chain in programmatic right now: the advertiser, the intermediaries, the demand side platform and the supply side platform, and the publisher. And in order to reach the right supply across the right audiences across the open web, you need a demand side platform who's got the skill and the savvy, not only to plug into the right supply, but to bid correctly based upon how valuable that user impression is likely to be. And so some of the things that we do as we focus primarily on mid-market agencies and their clients are to give access to these agencies tools that were typically only available to much larger agencies and brands. We don't operate through resellers, right? Our feeling is if you want to work with a company, then you should get to work with that company. Like there's no client that's, too small for us to say, let's bring our data scientists in, let's bring our CTO in and talk about how we're going to solve this problem together. That's us. I mean, look, there's plenty of DSPs out there. There's plenty of good ones. A distinction I do want to draw, though, is between the open web, which is what we serve, which is basically everything but the walled gardens. And then there's Facebook and Google and maybe one or two others that are walled gardens, and we don't play in. No other independent DSPs play in that space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'd love to just dig a little further into that. Like, what are some of those tools, and what do they look like? Yeah.
Incrementality measurement is really the most powerful one. So incrementality, again, understanding the difference between people that bought the shampoo because they saw the ad versus people who bought the shampoo and were going to buy the shampoo regardless of whether or not they saw the ad. So in the case of the former, we should spend more money on that tactic. In the case of the latter, we should stop spending money on that tactic because sure, there's a great correlation between people that we ran the ad on and people who bought the thing, but that doesn't tell you anything. That just tells you that your targeting was spot on and, good for you. But it doesn't tell you the impact that your marketing had on your business. So we bake incrementality measurement and optimization right into our platform. Typically, if you want to do brand studies and understand footfall traffic, you would need to hire a third-party incrementality measurement company. And that costs money and that costs time. And maybe you'll get a report halfway through the campaign telling you how you're doing. And then again at the end, which doesn't do you much good when you're looking to optimize in real time. We're all about real time and we're all about helping marketers get that signal of what's working and let's do more of that, and what's not working and let's do less of that in time for them to impact their currently running campaigns.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'd love to just kind of understand a little bit better about how you differentiate between correlation and causality. Causation or causality?
Causation, yeah, or causality. We can.
Well, it sounds like a Bushism, but yeah, is there? How does that work? Like, is there a case study or something you could talk about? Like, aside from jumping into a consumer's skull and figuring out what they're thinking, how do you track these things?
Yeah, so I'll give you the sort of short answer and then the longer answer. The short answer is I do not want to bore your audience by getting into the 11 different methodologies of incrementality measurement. However, if they are looking to learn about that, if you go to our website, go to the news section of the site, we truly do have myriad posts on incrementality and measurement. And we use something called ghost bids, which is a technique to measure incrementality that we believe is the very best. The slightly longer answer, the one that will not put your audience to sleep, I don't think, is we measure incrementality using randomized control trials. Same thing as drug companies do. So there's a group that has been exposed, there's a group that has been not exposed. You do some statistical modeling and you begin to draw some pretty sharp correlations between this audience being targeted, this price being paid, this creative being shown, and the desired actions being taken. If it looks the same between your test and control group, right? If it's a drug, to use that analogy, and placebo and test groups are the same, then you probably don't have a winner. But that delta between test and control, right? Medication and placebo, the delta there tells you how much of a lift you got. And we do the same thing. In the case of pharmaceutical companies, they kind of have to be 100% certain. Statistical modeling isn't really as much of an opportunity in pharma, but in advertising, it doesn't have to be 100%, right? Like you're not going to kill anyone by getting their attribution wrong. And so what you do instead is you look to sample data, build models that data scientists are good at building, do analyses on the data, then extrapolate based upon, depending upon the campaign's KPI, it might be brand lift or brand awareness or perception. It might be football traffic. It might be website conversions. It might be site visits. And then based upon what that KPI is, model out how many more people did the thing because they saw the ad. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm glad we went into the weeds here because it's super fascinating. And it makes so much sense that you'd want to model this on the same way that a pharmaceutical company or health organization would, because it's essentially the same thing. If you just think of marketing as kind of like a drug, which it kind of is, it makes a lot of sense. And the real question is why it's taken this long for, so many organizations to think of things this way, which sort of begs the question, because I'm not by no means an expert, but I've read commentaries on meta-analyses in the health space, on randomized control trials, stuff related to all the hot button issues with COVID. And when you really dig into some of these commentaries, you just see how much BS there is, how many bad incentives there are, how many good incentives there are, but people just getting it wrong because the sample size is too small. They've screwed something up. And this is where the stakes are really high, where these are life and death issues. So you can only imagine how much worse it is in the marketing space. So with that in mind, I often rant on the show about different things, and I go through periods of ranting about things. One of them, like the recent, completely unrelated, is hiring practices. People say, hey, don't go through interviews, don't check references, just give people a shot. I think is crap, because interviews do help and so on. So I'd love to give you a chance to rant. What are those things in the attribution measurement marketing space, whatever, that you're why do people keep doing it this way?
I mean, I'll start with the answer before I get to the question, because the answer is probably more frustrating and more rant-worthy than the question. The reason that people have not been coming to this realization sooner and acting upon it is because there are entrenched inefficiencies and misaligned incentives in the industry that have kept advertisers, intentionally or not, in the dark in many cases around, what's actually working. We made a huge mistake as an industry 25 years ago when we embraced click-through rate as sort of the only metric for success. And this is going to sound familiar to you. I mean, anybody who has ever seen any research on click-throughs shows that the people who click are generally not the same people who buy the thing. It is shocking that here we are, 24, 25 years into this industry, and you still have marketers optimizing to click through. It is almost impossible to get some of them to change that behavior. And so that built-in inefficiency persists, right? So if you are, kind of a day-to-day media buyer, and you look at your MBOs, you look at your goals for the quarter, and your goals for the quarter say you got to achieve a 1% click-through rate on our display campaigns, I can walk in there and talk about incrementality all day long. I can talk about why click-through is stupid. I can talk about why CPA isn't even really a great idea. But if you're gold as an employee, or if you're gold as a department or an agency on these older metrics that maybe make us feel good but don't actually matter, it's going to be really hard to change your mind. And so what's finally been happening is that marketers are starting to demand it. Again, you go where the money is. So marketers are becoming more and more sophisticated, and they're insisting that incrementality measurement be an important part of their understanding of their advertising. And, you sort of want the effect that took place 25 years ago with click-through rates to happen again, where the marketer demands it, it trickles down to the agency, the individual buyers, the team members, and it might mean changing your mental model of where you should be running. It might mean breaking a little bit of the inertia. But if we don't do that, it is nearly malpractice as media buying organizations to optimize to things that waste the advertiser's money.
Yeah, I really like that. And you see that everywhere, where there's optimizing for one legible metric at the expense of everything else. You see that in all areas of life and business. But I'd love to sort of devil's advocate things a little bit and imagine your CMO tenure is shorter than, a foot soldier in Vietnam in 68 or something, right? It's a few months, so if you're in that situation, what has to change for you to rethink the metrics? Do you need a much longer time horizon to look at metrics that are more useful? What structurally has to happen for things to shift away from click-through rate and these other things that aren't as useful?
Yeah, so the marketing functions and the revenue functions inside organizations need to start talking to each other. These things are typically happening in isolation, right? You've got the marketing team that's got its metrics. You've got the revenue organization that is, determining how many bottles of shampoo are sold, but the loop is generally not being closed. And so what we've been advocating for, and we're starting to see marketers and agencies doing, is to, you got this thing in your brain that connects the left and right side, the corpus callosum. They're starting to build those bridges and they're starting to close those loops. Closing the loop is something that marketers have said they've wanted to do since the beginning, right? Of all of this. And there's always been these forces that have prevented them from doing it. So, what do you do as a marketer? You get the right people on the right teams talking. You goal yourself based upon real world things, right? If you're goaling yourself on cost per action, for instance, you are incentivized as a buyer to keep frequency really low, right? Because the lower the frequency, the less you're paying on a CPA basis. However, what we know about lift measurement is that you have to have frequency much higher in order to generate lift. And so we're a startup, we've been around for a few years, we're good at what we do, but if you've got a client, if you've got a marketer who says, that all sounds great, but I want to optimize to CPA, we die a little bit inside, but we don't consider it, we'll do it, right? We don't consider it a lost cause. We just consider it a not yet, because it's inevitable that marketers will come around to enforcing this in their teams and in their agencies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'd love to just sort of understand, because a lot of our audience might be that boutique or mid-market agency. What are they typically doing? What are some of the solutions they're using if they're not using a tool like this? And what's, aside from just signing up for Martin, what's a better way they can start to think about things?
Yeah. So first, think about it, right? So you can't really solve the problem until you admit that you have one. And if you're optimizing to click-through rate or to, God forbid, spend the budget, which we still see, you're just wasting money. And so you got to realize that you have a problem, and then you start to solve it. And while we would love that everybody solve it by picking up the phone and calling, I don't even know if we have phones, going to their computer and emailing us and going to the website, there are other companies that do, parts of what we do. Like, you can go and commission a brand lift or brand recognition study. You can go and commission footfall analyses, and then you can run those analyses in concert with the advertising that you're doing. In our case, it happens to all be in one place. It happens to not come with, onerous minimums or term requirements. If the dream is for everybody to sort of catch on to incrementality and work with us, then the slightly less good but still happy dream is just work with incrementality. Just get it. Start to get that what you're doing is wasteful, and however you want to use it, however you want to get there, measure lift, right? Understand what your advertising is doing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And it seems like in situations in the consumer world where there's enough data, it makes perfect sense that there would be a model that's more like a randomized control trial. That seems like a no-brainer to me. And beyond that, the B2B world, small sample size is a little bit different. There's a little bit of you have to go on hunch and deal with a good amount of uncertainty, as we all do with all things. But that slots into my thinking. So Lewis, kind of getting towards the end of our time. One question I've been asking lately is just what are you optimistic about, either in the space and business and life, in the world, if anything?
What am I
optimistic about?
What am I optimistic? I'm optimistic about everything. I'm optimistic about things that people find repulsive, like the upcoming cookie changes. I'm optimistic that we are starting to build an industry that is more accountable and trustworthy, and that there are more good actors in the industry than there are bad actors. I'm optimistic that the consumer economy is going to continue to be strong. That needs to happen. Bad consumer economy leads to less marketing, which leads to, all sorts of bad things. And as we know, you can't really cut your way into making more money. You do need to be on board. And, even through the darkest days of COVID, we had advertisers who recognized that some of their competitors had gone dark. And so it was a great opportunity for them to step in and fill the void. So it's hard not to be optimistic based upon all the great things that our industry is innovating around.
Yeah, makes sense. And Lewis, how can people follow you, learn what you guys are up to and get in touch and so on?
Yeah, so martin.ai is the website. hello@martin.ai gets you in front of me. The website, it's not just a brochure. If you click on the news section, we have a couple dozen POVs and case studies and blog posts about these very topics, all told by people far smarter than I. And I would invite your listeners to check it out. There's no, like, we don't do the thing where it's like, sign up with your information to be able to download this white paper. Like, just go do it. One of our core values is the free diffusion of knowledge, and we mean that. So please check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. We'll get that linked up. Lewis, thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.